Conducting the Future. Our interview series starts from the question which ecological, political or social responsibilities conductors see included in their work today. In how far has a conductor's engagement changed since Herbert von Karajan's era, and how do conductors of today see the future of their profession? Can the answer to all be found in the music, or is that a naive attempt? From what point in one's career is a conductor in the position or even has the responsibility to influence our society? Conducting the Future.
You know, conducting is a job for a man, or is it? Conducting is authority without compromise, or is it? You know, all of these questions now are being asked, and this is, you know, in every leadership field. So I think that conducting, in a way, is going through changes that are logical within our culture.
I think on all fronts, it's changed dramatically since Karajan's time. I think, although that said, I would like to mention that I still think there's an archetypal image of the conductor as the inaccessible maestro who is untouchable and inscrutable, which I think is quite damaging in the times that we live in. But I think musicians now, they're looking for and they're expecting a much more collaborative experience from the conductor. The institutions are also expecting, I think, a much more engaged person that is accessible and reachable. And so I think on one level it's changed dramatically, but there's still this, I think this holdover perception of the conductor as, you know, the maestro way up above in the clouds.
Karajan lived in a time where there was still a very clear understanding of hierarchy. A powerful position had to be a little bit, you know, show power, and very often the way power was shown at that time, and in some cases also at this time, is through diminishing others, through degrading others. I'm not necessarily sure that Karajan was like that, because I think that Karajan had a kind of an interesting balance between a real respect for musicians, and I think he also respected musicians. But I think that still the old-fashioned image of a leader in the Karajan's time was a kind of a little bit, you know, arm's length, not easily accessible, quite serious. You know, in general, this whole serious and a little threatening kind of posture, I think it was very much the case and norm at that time.
You have to think that and remember that conducting is very different from being an instrumentalist, because you don't have an instrument unless you're in front of an orchestra. So it really requires a lot more experiential learning rather than, you know, alone in your room learning. So I do think, and of course, so much of conducting is also the psychology of interacting with people. And that's something that very few people are just born with. So it takes time to develop that, I think. And I also find that in general, I think we as human beings are in way too much of a rush. For what, I don't know, but, you know, let's hurry and push people and this kind of thing. And maybe we do a disservice to the young conductors this way.
I think the attitude toward hierarchy and toward leadership has changed. Maybe one could call it from transactional, someone leading and some people sort of reacting, to transformational, where one is more a catalyst. And that I think has changed. Although one has to say that in the history of conducting, that approach of a flatter hierarchy and more transformational and more enabling musicians than actually, you know, dictate them, has a long tradition. So, and Bruno Walter is a figure who was known for being basically in that area. So I would say many of the impulses that we have today and that we try to strengthen also have a historical component.
To me, it was just a pure luck, because not everybody is born in a musical family or conductor's family. But what happens really is that if you have, in my case, a very close relationship with my father, we listen to different recordings or listen to different interpretations of the same piece. So if you have an option to listen to a Mavlast in 4 different versions, or Bach Matthäus Passion in 4 different versions, then of course you start hearing certain differences, and these things actually develop you. If you just hear something and say, well, I like it, or I don't like it. If this is the 2 options, then, and nobody will point out, but what, listen to this. Let's listen again. So this, oh yeah, that's right. Did you hear it? No, I didn't. You see, this kind of thing, and that's how I grew up. I grew up trying to kind of assimilate information, but it was always a game. It was never a study. It was always literally a game. Which composer is it? He put on a CD, on no CDs at the time, LP. If you don't know the composer, which era, Romantic, Classical, Baroque. If you don't know that, which country? Does it sound like Russian music? Does it sound like German music? Does it sound like Czech? And if you do this all your childhood, you become very, very good at guessing and very good at recognizing certain patterns. And so, but there was always a competition between my sister and me.
As I looked around, as my career developed and grew, I expected that I would see a lot more women in the field. And 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years went past, and the numbers were very similar. And so I decided that I needed to at least put a stake in the ground and say, okay, if I don't do something, who really is going to try to change this landscape? So it was a very conscious effort to say, I want to create something that is completely devoted to women on the podium. And if you're a woman interested in pursuing, I will try to be a resource for you and make it easier for you. So it was a very conscious decision in 2002 to start this fellowship. And what a joy today that there are so many more women who are entering the field and succeeding in the field.
Well, I think that, and I never thought about it before actually, but right now I just caught myself thinking that maybe if we would be growing up right now, my sister would maybe think about becoming a conductor, because at that time it was simply just no, there was not a job for women. Right now, it's a different reality. So in a way, I don't think it has anything to do with talent. She's just as talented as anybody else, and she's very talented. But it was simply not an option. So who knows? I mean, she might have become a conductor, and we would have had even one woman conductor in the family.
I would say yes, conductors are leaders, but they're also facilitators, and I believe artists in general, musicians in general, are becoming leaders. And I think one of the roles of the conductor is to level the field a little bit and bring musicians along to become leaders as well. A bit flatten the hierarchy. Of course, a conductor figure, there's a lot of potential in highlighting the role of the conducting, but I would not forget about how musicians are also challenged in these times to step up to become leaders in very different ways. So I see both conductor and instrumentalists and singers as curators of experiences of a variety of people, hosts of the experience of a variety of groups. And so the skill set and the communication set and the interpersonal connection capacities of conductors and of all other musicians are increasingly broadening.
Talent of being a good musician, that's something else. But conducting is a profession of communication, also leadership, but also understanding and of the climate in the orchestra, the people who are the ones who create climate. And some people never have any issue with authority. And they're young, but they come on, they're very nice, they know what they're doing, and there is zero issue of authority, and they are 25 years old. And then there are people who are much older, much more experienced, and they have issues with authority. So it's partly a personality, but also a human experience of how to talk to people and how to ask for things in a way that musicians would be willing to try it. And you know, if you are a young conductor, you cannot, I mean, we all made these mistakes when we were young. You cannot go in and just say, look, I'm a conductor, you have to do this. It doesn't work. And most of the musicians know the piece better probably anyway, because if you do the Dvorak 9 for the first time, they've played it, you know, for 20 years. So in a way, a right cocktail or a balance of authority, humility, knowledge, and the human awareness is all part of the conducting job.
I love watching other conductors. I find it a fascinating thing, simply because it's such a mysterious thing. Of course, there's conducting technique, and and probably Paavo is the best example. I think he's got probably the best technique in the business. So we say he can basically do anything. However, in my experience, and I've worked as a pianist with over 200 conductors in my life, and so I've experienced a lot of different conductors, some good, some not so good, some working very well, great chemistry with orchestra, some struggling to get any kind of chemistry. So I've seen a lot of stuff, and the mysterious thing is that conducting technique alone doesn't solve anything.
Sometimes this situation gets to a point where you really have the attention of the musicians, and not only enough musicians, but the attention of every single one. And that happens very rarely, but that happens sometimes. That you are in this place with these people, you say something, and then you feel and you know the ears are all turned.
That says a certain something, you know, if you have this kind of dignity, this kind of inner energy, this sort of expecting, even when he closed his eyes, and so every player knew he expects me to do exactly this. I mean, music is a lot about this inner force anyway. You know, if you learn anything as a conductor, when you start off, you do all your big gestures. If anything, what you learn is everything can be less and less and less and less and less, and you get much bigger results. And a great orchestra, even if you show something with hardly a gesture that's, you know, quite small, you know, you can get quite big sounds. So it is about this inner connection, and I admire what Karajan does with his hands, how he shapes things in mid-air. I was speaking before about the conductors that beat things to death. He certainly never did that. I mean, you never see him do this. It's always a very round movement.
One very important thing is time management and communication. Find a way that you can put across a message where everyone is going to understand it, and everyone is going to either accept it or be able to comment on it, and comment musically, so that I can say like that. Well, that's not new at all. Eh? Like think of misty something. And those are things that almost everybody can relate to.
Putting your real personality out there, taking the risk of being ridiculous. Also when speaking to an orchestra, to take the risk of using comparisons where some people might go or whatever, but if you produce an image that might help solve something, I think it's always worth it taking that risk. And the better an orchestra and the more musical the impulse in the orchestra, the more it's appreciated if you really speak music and if you really speak emotion and images.
I think that's one of the characteristics of this profession, actually. There is no place where you can hide. So you are there. Everyone knows what you are thinking. Everyone knows what you are going to say. I mean, everyone, maybe not you, but that's one of the characteristics of group dynamics, that the group is so big that there is always a percentage of people there who has seen this pattern I'm using in communicating, for example. They have seen that somewhere else.
I see the core of the music making is being a conductor all the time. When I play my piano music, I am, and I'm speaking to my students about this a lot at the moment, this is in a way the orchestra, what my fingers are doing and what they're performing as to what I'm asking them to do. But there's an internal conductor at the same time who takes the decisions, who, in a way, it's like an external person inside of me that says, okay, I want this tempo, I want this character of the piece. And certainly in the sound, I'm not aiming for piano sounds, but I'm aiming for a sound of a singer, of a violinist, of a flute, of an oboe, of a bassoon. So I'm aiming for different colors, usually outside of the piano.
I think one central thing is to become community musicians, to become teaching artists and to become connected to communities, different communities, and to have a vision of serving those communities and enabling experiences for those communities. And what can lead in that are a variety of things. One might, for example, look at the UN's social development goals to have an idea of what society wants and where society wants to go to. And then the question is, okay, how can we help in this as musicians, be it conductors or non-conductors? Of course, taking a stand as musicians and being clear of where one is and what the values are is essential. At the same time, I also see a potential of taking a step back and enabling spaces of experience of all sorts of people, also with other opinions or with other intuitions, and to enable connections that are in a way behind the sort of day-to-day political controversies. Not saying that it's not important to take a stand again, but I think there's a potential to take a step back also and to focus on larger things like these UN social development goals.
I've always wanted to create opportunities for the public to sit in on rehearsals, whether it's literally sit in or these days through Zoom or Skype, and observe the process, because I think the creative process is one that every human being can relate to. We're all creative beings, and watching someone else in the throes of creativity, it can be very inspiring for people. And of course, these days, without the same level of music education in school as youngsters, I think it requires an even bigger effort on our part to reach out to listeners and to the general public and to create access.
Well, a conductor gets a lot of attention, and whether rightly or not, because I mean, in terms of politics or our development as a society, often maybe some of the members of the orchestra would have maybe more clever things to say than the conductors, you know. Why would they necessarily have the big view over things? It's a bit like in society, you know. I mean, these days, a conductor certainly represents something. You know, that's another thing. You know, any orchestra needs to get their audiences, needs to get their sponsors, needs to get their recording contract, and so on. And so a conductor, they look for a conductor who they love and love working with and are artistically happy with. But let's face it, they also want the ambassador for their brand.
You know, I think this is a very personal and individual choice that one makes. And, you know, I'm not a person that can just stand on the sidelines and say, this doesn't affect me, you know, I'm just here to do the music. Because I believe that when one is given a platform from which one can really set an example, I think it's a bit disingenuous not to take advantage of that. So I feel strongly that activism and being socially responsible is a big part of being an artist, whether it's a conductor or musician or actor or whomever. But of course, I don't know that that should be a defining feature or a defining factor in assessing someone's artistry.
We're not living in a different world. We live in this world. And so it's clear that we think about this world and possibly, and are simply as a member of society, maybe a quite exposed member of society, we share our thoughts and our values and our worries, our concerns and our hopes. And in a Beethovenian sense, maybe we try to also make the world a little bit better with music, you know, and give people the energy to overcome our fears and our hate and our all these things, and find to a better society in some ways. That's the ideal world, you know. I'm not saying we all manage that.
I feel that we're living in a time of where we're having sort of a crisis of courage. I feel that we don't have enough people who are courageous enough to stand up and speak their truth. And so I would say that I'm looking for that, not just from artists, but I'm looking at that from politicians. I'm looking at that from all of our leaders. And it makes a big difference to me when someone is willing to stand up for what they believe in.